For the last time, we talked about common terms in organic chemistry. We discussed about molecular formula. We discussed about structural formula, isomers, and so forth. Now, the other part that we want to talk about organic chemistry, and this is very important, we call it hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons, it is a simple word. Hydrocarbon means it is a carbon, it is a organic compound which is made up of hydrogen and carbon. And that is why it is called hydrocarbon. Means what? This is the combination of hydrogen and carbons. Now, if now hydrogen and carbon get together, they form it what we call it hydrocarbon. Now, this is the organic compounds. Organic compounds that is made up of hydrogen and carbon. So the hydrocarbons comes from the word hydrogen and the word carbons. If now when you're talking about hydrocarbon, you mean of carbon and hydrogen. Together they form it what we call it hydrocarbon. Now, if now you have hydrogen, then plus carbon, this is equal now to hydrocarbon. Now, hydrocarbon is not a difficult word. It is because it is a combination of hydrogen and carbon. Now, we have groups of hydrocarbons. We have groups of hydrocarbons. Groups of hydrocarbons, we have two of them. We have saturated hydrocarbon and we have unsaturated hydrocarbon. Saturated hydrocarbons means all of the bonds of carbon are occupied by other carbon atom or by carbon atom or by other atom. Example, if now you're talking about this one, this is this one. If now all of the carbon bonds, all of the carbon bonds are occupied. Now this is occupied. Now this is occupied. This is occupied. We call it saturated hydrocarbons. Now hydrocarbons, saturated hydrocarbons means all of the bonds of the carbon are occupied with the hydrogens. As you may see here, it is all occupied. There is no bond which is free. This is occupied by hydrogen, 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 hydrogen. And this is called saturated hydrocarbons. That is why we say saturated hydrocarbons are formed if all the four possible bonds of every carbon atom are joined using a single bond to another carbon atom or hydrogen atom. If this is joins, all the single bond are joins with other carbon atom or hydrogen, so this or hydrogen atom, this is called saturated. If now you find the hydrocarbons with single bonds to a carbon and to other carbon or to other hydrogen atom, that is called saturated. But unsaturated, this is double bonds. This is double bonds or triple bonds. Triple bonds. If now you find the carbon is joined with the double bond, example, this is C, this is 1. Now this is here, now C2, now CH2. Because 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, now it is 4. Now this is the unsaturated hydrocarbons. The same applies if now you have a triple bonds. This is the H here, H here. Why is it so? Because once you count the bonds around the carbon atom, you find we have 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then 1, 2, 3, 4. this is saturated, unsaturated. Now, unsaturated means that it may needs, it have the room to allow other hydrogen to get into that functional group. We said this is a functional group. Now, whenever you're talking about hydrocarbons, cause na kuwepo mbili, kuna zile saturated ambazo tunasema kwamba carbon inakuwa inazungukwa na single bond ambazo zote kwa ujumla wake zimeshikiliwa, lakini ile unsaturated ni ile ambayo inakuwa na triple bonds au inakuwa na double bonds. Kwa hii inaruhusu sasa kwamba hiki kingine kije kwa ataki hapa, kwa sababu hii ni functional group, ina uwezo sasa kupokea hydrogen, ina uwezo wa kupokea halides na kadhalika. Lakini hii hapa triple bond na yenyewe imezungukwa, hii ni triple bond, means a triple bonded carbons ambazo ni mbili zimeunganishwa, kwa maana zinaruhusu hata halides, hata vitu vingine kuja kwa ataki hapa na kutengeneza compound nyingine. So we have two groups of hydrocarbons. We have saturated hydrocarbons and we have unsaturated hydrocarbons. Saturated hydrocarbons, it is the carbons are joined with single bonds or with other hydrogen bonds. Example, this is methane. Hydrogen, hydrogen, hydrogen here, hydrogen. Now, this is what we call it is saturated. But this is unsaturated because it is a double bond and triple bonds. Now, double bond and triple bond are called unsaturated. But for those who have got single bonded carbon and hydrogen together with hydrogen, they are called saturated hydrocarbons. That's all about saturated hydrocarbons. Then, what are the families? We have families. Families of hydrocarbons. We have families of hydrocarbons. Families of hydrocarbons, there are three. We just have one, we call it alkane. And the second, it is called alkenes. And the third one is called alkynes. Now, what are the families of hydrocarbons? We have three of them. We just have alkane, we just have alkene, we just have alkynes. Now, whenever you're talking about the families of hydrocarbons, you mean of this one, this one, this one. So we will be discussing one after another. We discuss about alkane, we discuss about alkene, we discuss about alkynes. Now, every one of them have got its unique properties, unique preparation, unique chemical properties and physical properties. Sometimes physical properties may be the same, but chemical properties are a difference. The reaction between alkenes and other elements is quite different to the reaction between alkane and other elements. And also it is quite different from the alkynes and the other elements. So these are the families of hydrocarbons. And I have said, here we will be discussing about hydrogen and the hydrogen and carbon only, because they are called hydrocarbons. They are only made up of hydrogen and carbon. The same applies. If now you're talking about alkanes, you only find the hydrogen and carbon. If now you're talking about alkenes, you already find the hydrogen and the carbon. If now you're talking about alkynes, you already find about hydrogen and carbon. So we'll be discussing about families of hydrocarbons, which are alkanes, alkenes, and alkynes. Before we discuss about this one, we have to know naming of hydrocarbons. Here, it is something very important for us to understand naming of hydrocarbons. Unapofanya naming, when you are naming about this one, first of all, you have to know we have two things to discuss here. We have root name and we have primary suffix. It's an English. Primary suffix. I mean, a primary suffix is the way that is added after the root name. And this depends on the family that you are talking about. So you have to be very careful about naming about this one. So one of them, you have to know the root name. And the second thing, you have to know the primary suffix. Now the primary suffix or suffix is the word that added after the root name. So tunaelewana hapo kwamba lazima kwanza ujue root name. Sasa what is the root name and what is the primary suffix? Sasa root name indicates the nature of the basic carbon chain making up the hydrocarbon. Means how many carbons are there, that is root name. Now the root name is because how many carbons are there. But the suffix, the word that added to show that what kind of the family are you talking about. If now you're talking about alkali, you have to indicate with A and E. If now you're talking about alkene, you have to indicate with E and E. But if now you're talking about alkynes, you have to indicate by Y and E. Now, the root name indicates, if now you're talking about root name, indicates the number. It is there to show the number of carbons. How many carbons are there? That is the number of carbons. But the primary suffix, the word that is added after you have written the root name. Now, for instance, now you're talking about carbon. I mean, if now you're talking about hydrogen with, hydrocarbon with one carbon. Hydrocarbon with one carbon with the root name. If now number of carbons. Now root name. Let us show the table here. The number of carbon, if now we have one number of carbon, the root name is called meth. Not messy, meth. Now the root name is called meth. Now if now you're talking about hydrocarbon with one carbon, the root name is called meth. If now you're talking about alkane, you call it methane. You have added the word A and E. But if now you're talking about it with two carbon, we call it F. So this is applicable to every member of hydrocarbons. Whether you're talking about it, alkane, if now you're talking about it, alkane, it is applicable. If now you're talking about alkene, it is applicable. If now you're talking about alkyne, it is applicable. Means the hydrocarbon with the two carbons, it is root name is called Ep. If now you're talking about hydrocarbon of three carbons, it is root name is called the plop. If now you're talking about hydrocarbon with four carbons, it is the root name is called the buttes. If now you're talking about why do we show with dash? Because we need to go ahead with other things. For alkane, we just add A and E. For the alkene, we just add E and E. For the alkynes, we just add Y and E. Now, talking about hydrocarbons with the four carbons, the root name is called the butte. Talking about hydrocarbons with three carbons, it is root name is called the plop. Talking about hydrocarbons with two carbons, it is root name is called F. But talking about hydrocarbons with one, we call it meth. But talking about hydrocarbons with the five carbons, we call it peds. But with the six six carbons, we call it hep. With 7, we call it hepty, root name. And with 8, we call it octi. With 9, we call it nan. With 10, we call it dex. Now, the hydrocarbon with 80, it is automatic, it is root name is called octi. But hydrocarbon with 7, its root name is called heptane. Hydrocarbon with 10 number of carbons, we call it dec. If now you're talking about hydrogen, you're talking about what? Alkane. If now you talk, let's talk about alkane here. So it will be called methane. This is ethane. This is the propane. This is the butane. This is the pentane. This is the heptane. This is the heptane. This is the octane. This is nonane. This is decane. Means I have added A and E to the root name. And this is what we call it primary suffix. It is the way that we have added to this root name. Now the root name is added according to the family of hydrocarbons. Now you're talking about family of hydrocarbon like alkane, you add A and E. That is methane, ethane, propane, butane, pentane, hexane, heptane, octane, nonane, decane. But if now you're talking about alkenes, that is E and E. This will be called methane. We don't have the methane because alkene is a double bonded carbon. So we won't have the bonded carbon to the single carbon. It won't happen. That is why we don't have methane. There is no methane. Why is it? Because these have got a single carbon. And it won't happen a single carbon with a double bond. That is not something that's not existing. A single carbon with a double bond in hydrocarbon, that is something that's not existing. But we just have double bonds because these have got 2 carbons. Means it may have 2. This is possible. And that is why we start with ethene, propene, butene, pentene, hexene, heptene, octene, nonene, bethene. You may see we have added the primary suffix to show that we are talking about alkene. And here we have added the primary suffix to show that we are talking about alkane. The same applied if now you're talking about alkynes. Alkynes. Y and E are the suffix that we should add to the root name. So this, we don't have also methane because there is no triple bonds between the carbon and carbon for a single carbon. It won't happen. And it's something that does not exist. Kwa hiyo hakuna double bond au triple bond ya carbon moja. Kwa sababu triple bond tunayozungumzia, it should be carbon to carbon. If there is no carbon to carbon, that is not a triple bonds. Hauwezi ukasema, now let me light a double bond for this one, then H. It does not exist kwa sababu huyu ni monovalent. H is a monovalent element. And this is a tetravalent element, it is true. But this cannot accept this principle. Kwa hiyo huyu haweza akapokea. Kama huyu hapa haweza akapokea, ni kitu ambacho hakipo. Na ndio maana sasa hatuna kitu kinachoitwa methynes. We don't have it. But we have ethynes. Ethynes. Ethine. Why do we have ethine? Because ethine is a hydrocarbon with 2 carbons. It is possible to obtain the triple bondeds. This is possible to obtain the triple bondeds because it has got 2 carbons. And therefore, this is ethynes. This is propane. Then this is butane. This is pentane. And this is the heptane. This is the heptane. This is octane. This is nonine. This is decine. So you may see, naming of hydrocarbons is dominated by considering the two things. One is the root name, and root name indicates the number of carbons. How many carbons are there? The one that will show the root name. If now you have 5 carbons, means we are just talking about the pents. That is the root name. But now pents is all about alkane, alkenes, or alkynes. So it is something that exists and you have to consider about it. So what is happening here? The root name is derived from the number of carbons, and the suffix is derived from the type of the family that you're talking about. Kama unazungumzia alkane, basi tunaishia na A-N-E. Kama unazungumzia alkene, basi inaishia na E-N-E. Kama unazungumzia alkynes, inaishia na Y-N-E. Kwa hiki ni kitu ambacho ni muhimu sana. Kwa hiyo kuna majina, tunapofanya naming ya hydrocarbons, tunafanya consideration ya root name, ambayo root name inaangalia idadi ya carbons. Kwa hata tunapokuja kufanya choose longest chain, tutajikuta kwamba tunaangalia how many carbons are there. Na hiyo ndio ina provide the root name, ambayo ndio itakuwa parent chains. Now we'll be talking about the parent chain, the longest chain in the chain. We just call it a parent chain. Others they are just called a chart. Kama ni watoto, substrates tunawaita watoto ambao wanakuwa wamejiattach. Lakini the parent name is because of the root name. Kwa root names, hii root name and suffix kwa pamoja zinapoungana ndio zinatengeneza the naming. Now the naming depends on the root name and the primary suffix. The suffix in English is the word that is added after. Kwa hiyo hapa the word added, prefix the word added before. Lakini hapa hatuna prefix kwa sababu tunaongelea suffix, ni neno ambalo linaongezwa mbele. And that is why the root indicates the nature of the base carbon chain making up the hydrocarbons. Chaining is 1 up to 4. Carbon atoms are known as by the special root words. These are the special root words. These are the special root words. But these are derived from the Greek numbers. 5 means pence. 5 pence, then hex, then... So this is the Greek words. Now the chain with 5 or more carbons atom are known by the respective Greek numbers. Because the Greek number indicates the number of carbon atom in the chain. Now these hapa ni special root words. Now 1, 2, 3, 4 they are called special root words. But these are Greek numbers and they indicate the number of carbons. If now you're talking about the hydrocarbons, 6 carbons, you mean of health. For alkane, the bond is single bond. That is carbon to carbon single bond. But the suffix that you should add it is A and E. That is why we have seen we have methane, meth, then methane. Then we have eth, then ethane. Then we have plop, then propane. Kwa hiyo zile za alkane tunatumia A and E. But if now you find about alkene, you're talking about alkenes, it is double bond. The double bonds. Double bonds, here it is. It is very important to understand, we just use E and E. If now you're talking about ethane, you have ethene. If now you're talking about plop, you have plopine. If now you're talking about here butane, here butene. Now, at the end of the root name, you have added E and E. E and E. E and E. Here A and E. To show that now you're talking about alkane, and to show that here now you're talking about alkynes. But for the Triple bonds. We're just talking about alkynes. Now this is a triple bonds. Mean 3 bonds between the carbon. And when I say triple bonds, between carbon and carbon, not between carbon and other things. Between carbon and carbon. Between carbon and carbon. If now you find different from this, what I've said, I don't think now you can understand. It is now Y and E. If now you're talking about this ethene becomes ethynes. You're talking about plop, it becomes plopine. If now you're talking about buttes, it becomes butynes. The same one, but what is the difference that now here I am talking about alkyne, here I am talking about alkenes, and here I'm talking about alkynes. So there are several differences. There are quite difference from the naming, but the root name is the same. Here we just have F, here we just have F, here we just have F. That is the root name. But the suffix is quite different from it. Suffix is quite different. I don't know if it is suffix or suffix. I don't understand. Not good word. I don't know how do we pronounce. But explaining about this one means that it is the word added after the root name. Now the word that is added after the root name depends to the family. What family are you talking about? I'm talking about alkyne. E and E. What family are you just talking about? I'm talking about alkene. E and E. A and E. E and E. Y and E. And that is what I've written here. Now the family, if now you're talking about alkyne, you mean of the single bond hydrocarbon. And it is suffix is A and E. And when you're talking about alkenes, you mean of the double bonds. And it must be between the carbon and the carbon, not between carbon and the oxygen. It won't happen. Now it is between carbon and carbon. That is E and E. If now you're just talking about alkynes, that is a triple bond between the carbon and carbon. That is Y and E. That is the suffix. So this word is added to the root name and depends on the family of the hydrocarbon that you're talking about. Now, after then, let us talk about it one after another. Let's start with the alkali.